Before we get to this week's episode, we just want to take a moment to tell you that the Chinoy TV documentary series, its current season, Chinese by Blood, Filipino by Heart, has now premiered. Tapos na po ang 8-8. So
Mhm.
for the next 10 weeks, you can catch the documentary on CNN Philippines Sundays at 8 p.m. And if you want to catch it on demand, it'll be available the following Monday on the YouTube channel of Chinoy TV. So all three of us are part of the documentary. We're super proud to be a part of it, and we can't wait for you to hear the things that we say. A lot of them we've
Uh-huh.
kind of broached on the podcast, so medyo mas refined yung pagkwenta namin there in the documentary. So again, it's called Chinese by Blood, Filipino by Heart. It's directed and produced by Emmy Award-winning filmmaker Mike Carandang, and you can catch it Sundays at 8 p.m. on CNN Philippines. Enjoy this week's episode.
Hey everyone! Before we get to this week's episode of Now Steaming, we just wanted to give you guys a trigger warning. This episode is centered on mental health and it will touch on some themes like the negative effects of mental health issues going unaddressed, like self harm and suicide. If these are topics that might serve as triggers for you, feel free to skip this episode. We totally understand and we'll catch up over next week's episode.
You're watching and listening to Now Steaming. This is the podcast where we talk about things from the millennial Chinoy perspective. And this is another episode that we've been planning for several weeks now. I think even since we began the podcast as a series, we've really been looking forward to an episode on mental health. But before we get to everything, we have to properly introduce ourselves. As always, my name is Stancy, and I'm joined by my collaborators, the co-creators of So Asian Comics, Kimberly Mas and Cedric Cheng. Guys, this episode has been a long time coming because we've been wanting to talk about mental health for quite some time. It's a very important conversation. It's something na traditionally in Asian cultures in general, hindi natin siya napapag-usapan because it's considered a taboo.
Yep.
And I think it's really high time that we start to break that stigma little by little by having these conversations. And we're really privileged to be joined in this episode by somebody who I came into contact with first when I was a student in UP, back when she was the advisor of the UP Chinese Student Association. She spent many years in the academe, in talent development, and in counseling. We are joined this week by Dr. Angela Yu. Auntie, thank you so much for joining us on Now Steaming.
Inviting me, Stan. Yeah, really appreciate being asked to provide insights into how the Chinoys are as a people, and especially in this topic on mental health.
Right. When I first reached out to you via Facebook chat, I really wanted to say na parang talagang priority namin to get the conversations out there. But before we dive deep into it, I'd like our listeners to get to know you better. So can you please give them an idea about the type of work that you do?
Oh, okay. Well, I'm that person who is a jack of all trades ever since, even until now. Although I do have a PhD in psychology and I'm a licensed psychologist and psychometrician, a lot of my work right now revolve around organizations and talent. So I've been helping organizations with talent assessment for executives and non-executives, not just in the Philippines but around the globe. And I've also worked with organizations to help out for development, OD, startups, and non startups. And I've also worked with them for coaching, counseling as well, mental health counseling. I do also have some individuals who come to me for counseling, but these are usually things I did on referral basis.
You mentioned before we hit recording now you also do you do counseling from home, and it's something that is super important these days with the pandemic being a really big stressor, like a universal stressor, because it affects all of us. So how was siguro to concretize it lang for our viewers and listeners who aren't as familiar with the idea of mental health, like how has the pandemic generally affected people in the sphere of mental health?
There had been an increase in calls. For instance, the National Center for Mental Health, which used to be, which is the one taking charge of this area in health-wise, in under the DOH, they actually logged in, I think, 400 times, 400 times more calls, or some, or I don't have the exact figure, but the calls have gone increased a whole lot during the pandemic. And during the early part of the lockdown last year, April, sometime March, April last year, I started having calls from people needing to have somebody to talk to help them alleviate the anxiety as well. Initially, it was a lot of anxiety because there's a whole lot of unknowns. And then later on, it became more around boredom, more around burnout, even because a lot of people have been didn't realize it, but they have been functioning extremely under the lockdown situation, working from home. And the divide between what's home and what's work is very blurry. And oftentimes people do work way beyond, they clocked in more work hours without realizing that it's been affecting their mental health.
I think very close to home po yun for a lot of us, di ba? Especially since yung nga, sabi ninyo, we work from home, yung boundary of ano ba yung work, ano ba yung bahay, yung personal time mo, yung work time mo, talagang na-shatter na siya because of the pandemic working setup. But as we zoom out here, how can you explain this idea of prioritizing mental health in layman's terms? Because as I said in the intro, traditionally sa kultura natin, not just as Filipinos, not just as Chinese, but as Asians, yung mental health is not something that we talk about so openly.
Yeah, for various reasons. But if you look into the history or the philosophy, especially in the ethnic Chinese culture, we have ways or inherent ways that allows people to function well in terms of mental health. In fact, we always talk about balance in the culture, right? Balance is good. So we also talk about chi or energy, ensuring that the energy it's not too diet or too thin. Those are actually concepts of balance that we can even apply when we talk about mental health, because mental health actually is energy as an imbalance in the energy. It could be an energy where there's a lot of anger or a lot of sadness or a lot more vitality. In fact, um, why is it important? Why? Because mental health is about being able to function and function well, given your set of tools, your set of talents, etc., and the realities in the environment. And having said that, what researchers is finally telling us, because neuroscience is a growing area or a growing field in natural or health sciences, we're finding out that a lot of our physical issues could also stem from psychological issues. And there's a much closer connect between what is physical health and well-being as well as mental health and well-being. In fact, there was this research, one of those earlier research on rats, mice. Diba? You usually start working with mice.
Yes.
So what they did was to get the well, I don't know if this is considered taboo word online, but since you already gave me permission early on, they got the feces from a mice that has been showing anxiety behaviors on a mice that never exhibited anxiety behaviors. And after inoculating these other mice, what they saw was this other mice who previously was healthy, no anxious behaviors, started exhibiting anxious behaviors. And that's what they talked about right now, which is a very hot topic, the gut-mind connect. So the mind-gut connect is again validated further on with a lot of other researches. And that tells us why is it important not to address mental health issues and not just simply look at physical well-being.
So, Auntie, I'm glad that you mentioned how yung mental health is really connected to the physical well-being, because when I first started being involved in conversations about mental health, ang pagkaka-explain sa akin is that it all goes back to your mind or to your brain, and your brain is ultimately an organ, so it's still physical. So, kung may problema yung brain mo na organ naman, bakit di mo siya i-address when you have a problem sa heart? Di ba ipapagamot mo siya? When you have a problem with your lungs or with any other type of your body, di ba? You're gonna try to address it. So what makes the brain so different? Is that something that you as a psychologist, is that something that you'd advocate as like an explanation?
Well, let's say the way we talk about mental health can be looked at in very different ways. We come from a disease model, meaning to say when something is wrong, it's a disease or disease. Nowadays, we're looking at it more of with a lighter tone, because the moment you say it's disease, people tend to avoid. Parang
Right.
pandemic, may COVID ka, walang gustong lumapit sa'yo. Diba? That's why there's quarantine, there's isolation. And it is the same with other types of diseases. It could be a mental disease. So you also isolate people who are unable to function well in society. And that's how it has been approached for the longest time. Pero ngayon, what we're looking at in terms of mental health is that, wait, we actually do have ways of preventing. We actually we don't have to be that drastic in how we judge people, for instance, like putting labels, which is something that we're also avoiding as professionals, even be it mental health or in physical well-being, although it helps, no? So right now, what we're trying to do would be to come up with a mental health perspective that allows people to be more proactive in dealing with issues, psychological issues, issues of well-being, for instance. And why is it very important? Because we realize that when people are well, they can do more, they can do better. They're more productive, they're no more innovative.
Yeah, definitely. Auntie, I really love how you put in a lot of examples. So I'm just gonna go backtrack a little bit in what you said earlier, like Chinese or like Asians in general, we like having a lot of balance, the chi, the diet, and all of that. I totally understand because my mom would always say that. And most of the time, I notice this not just well in my family, we're okay, okay. We don't really have a lot of these issues, pero some of my friends they do have this issue na their parents they don't confront the issue. They just become like really passive aggressive. So why do you think that in general, parang why are we so non-confrontational?
Oh, that's also a cultural issue. Well, it's actually part of the culture. It's based in Confucian culture, where we build relationships, we value relationships, and the closer the relationship, the more the need for harmony, because it's like COVID tells us something. The moment you're inside, cooped up in a house, where you have to confront, say, a spouse or a sibling or a child, and your relationship is bad, then it creates a lot of dissonance, right? And when things are dissonant, you can't perform. Even working from home becomes even more difficult because of that. And for the Chinese, and that's the reason why I really value a lot of the wisdom in the Chinese culture. For the Chinese, they say that this is important. You maintain harmony without being confrontative, because you want to come up with positive outcomes. Of course, having said that, we also see that sometimes not confronting or not dealing with the issue, or the approach being not direct confrontation, but maybe diagonally confronting or addressing the issue, has its downside. So it's really good to deal with issues. How the approach is when you're dealing with the issues, like being less passive aggressive, maybe being more factual, being less emotional, for instance. Those are things that we teach when we talk about coaching for executives, and in fact these are also valuable in intimate relationships. How do you talk to a person without raising that ire such that the person becomes defensive, but become more open and receptive? That's very important, even at the familial level. I guess non-confrontative could be reframed that way.
I'd like to bring up an example since Kim brought up yung subject of us being non-confrontational, borderline passive-aggressive, and like how do you address problematic behavior. So siguro a good example na lahat tayo makaka-relate to some degree is when a family member shares fake news dun sa Viber chat group. Like how do you address that, lalo na kapag kunwari ako, and then it was an auntie or an uncle or like a parent who shared yung fake news na yun. How do we address that?
Yes.
Ivermectin.
Ayun, that's a great
Yeah.
example.
Yep, yep.
Okay. Um, oh, that's a very interesting thing. It's been happening a lot. It's not just ivermectin. They have historically there's so many when we talk about COVID, and it's Well, in our culture also, we have levels of relationships, right? So when it's close family ties, you try to be as harmonious as possible because you see the person day in, day out, and you don't want to disrupt that relationship too much because you have a lot of consequences. In the culture, it talks about your behavior as having consequences, and that's tied to karma. Karma in the Hindu perspective, which is Buddhist also. But when the relationship is not as close, like, it's auntie, next layer, or more distant, non familial, then the confrontation is okay. So there is such a thing also. But you see, we have been taught a certain aspect of the culture, but not the entirety of the culture as well. And sometimes that backfires against us. So that also explains why with certain people they're willing to be risking the relationship and trying, underhand strategies because that person, even if that person it happens to be a Chinese against a Chinese, uh, there is not much of a relationship there.
So just to bring the conversation back to mental health, I think we've alluded to this na yung usapang mental health, taboo siya talaga, especially sa ating mga Chinoy. You won't find yung mga families normally talking about depression, anxiety, or lalo na yung mga mental health conditions like bipolar disorder and all that. So siguro
Yeah.
from a broad sense, Auntie, why is it taboo?
Um, well, have you watched the Nosedive?
No,
Nosedive
no,
and
I haven't.
Black
I
Mirror.
haven't
You
yet.
should watch
Oh
that.
no.
Well, that is happening in reality in China. So the social credit standing affecting how you could rent a house, buy things, buy
Is this the
stuff.
Black Mirror episode?
Yes.
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, I'm
Oh.
familiar with this one. Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
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 So in China, even before they came out with a technologically savvy social credit system, we have that also, and it could define whether those doors open for you, so you could get into a business, have connections, have loans. If you look into the history of even the Chinoy community business people, you can hear that, oh, this person was able to get a loan, secure a loan because somebody vouched for him, and that is connection for you, and that also rests a lot on your social standing. So social status is very important
Mhm.
among not just Chinoys, but among people with East Asian background. And to maintain that, you need to make sure you have a good reputation. And
Yeah.
uh, mental health issues also reflects on astute decision making.
Mhm.
If you have a mental health problem, you're likely to be certain ways, like, more ruder, make poor decisions, uh, have a lot of emotional outbursts, etc. And these are behaviors that are usually frowned upon. When you talk about
Yeah.
a society that's steeped into relationship building, ensuring networks, Kwanzi is very important. And of course, when you have somebody who's going through something like that, you would rather not, as a family,
Mhm.
discuss it at all. It becomes
Yeah.
hush hush. Even for family relationships, even among husband-wife relationships, when there is something wrong in the relationship, you don't just talk about it. You don't, you're quiet about, say, people, you have people getting annulled, for instance. In the Chinoy community, you don't talk about that at all.
Yeah.
But in the other cultures, there you see them in a newspaper, you see them being discussed. Oh yeah, I'm free, I'm gonna look for somebody else, but you don't see that, diba?
Yeah.
Because
Completely agree.
oh,
Mhm.
your social standing, where do you stand, who will open doors for you given your history.
It's very ironic that
Yeah.
you mentioned, Auntie, na, yeah, you don't openly talk about it probably in a matter-of-fact way, pero pinag-uusapan din siya in a chismis way. Like, oh,
Yes.
etong couple na to, lihon na, they're no longer together. Or, oh, yung anak ni ganito, may ganitong condition. Or, oh, yung anak ni ganito, yung girlfriend or boyfriend niya, hindi Chinese. Bakit ganon? Why are we parang mas inclined na maging chismoso-chismosa about these things? Whereas when it comes to addressing these issues head on, we shy away.
Sweep it under the
Actually,
rug.
is it okay if I interject a little bit? I feel like it's like yung chismis kasi it's more fun. Like it's because that person is not there, right? So you can freely talk about them behind their backs or whatnot. But for me, like that's a situation that I can say na I can relate to most of the time. No, if ever there's a problem, let's say in the family, let's say whenever my friends family they have problems, they most of the time they just sweep it under the rug, or they don't talk about it until it comes to a point na it's about to break, and then you can just notice little teeny tiny details that, oh, okay, there's something wrong in their family, or there's something wrong in this relationship, and you can just decipher from there. So
Yeah.
yeah.
What are
Talk.
your insights on this, Auntie?
Maintaining a facade that things are okay actually self supports your social standing, social
Yeah.
status. Being able to sustain, say, a family. We use the word one may, diba? One may means a very perfect, holistic, uh, as an ideal, and therefore any crack there makes it imperfect. I'm not sure if the Chinese culture or the well in Japanese, they have a solution to that. They have a description for that as a strategy of dealing with something that's imperfect. I'm not sure if the Chinoy or the Chinese culture has that in place. So being perfect means you have perfect scores. It's in school, diba? That's why you have people competing for first honor, valedictorian. It's summa cum laude for forever, and that ties into the model minority concept as well, even in the U.S. And so it tells you that it's important to maintain that facade, and you don't want to rock the boat, so to speak. If you open it up, then people will start to snoop, and people like to talk about other people
Yeah.
because it distances them from that issue. Kinda.
May pagka
Yeah.
self-righteous na parang sila ganito pero kami hindi kami ganyan.
I don't know if people would reflect though. There would be some people who would reflect. How am I? How are we?
That's a common case actually, like with well with friends as well. Like their parent, it's a common story now. Their parents would talk about other children, na parang, oh, my depression siya kasi and all that. But then when it comes to their own children, they don't want to acknowledge
Acknowledge.
that they have their own mental health issues to deal with. Like they just sweep it under the rug. And I remember one instance when a friend of mine opened up now when she had her mental health evaluation, and then the results came in via mail to their residence, right? And then her mom picked up the envelope, and when she read the results, she was like, "What is this? This is nonsense. Like this is not real. You're okay." So yeah, like that was just really, it was really bad. Yeah,
Yeah, that's a pretty problematic reaction
yeah,
Yeah.
from a parent, diba, na someone who's supposed to make you feel loved, feel
exactly.
safe. So, Auntie, how do we begin these conversations with our parents, for example, when these things happen? Kasi it's hard to try to get them to understand, diba, na parang wait lang, depression is a real thing or anxiety is a real thing.
Mhm. Yeah, it's kind of difficult. I've had clients who are young, well, millennials like yourselves, who during our conversation would have to look for, during the pandemic, would have to look for a secure room so the mom doesn't hear the conversation. And it happens. It happened more than once to different people that I've talked to. Uh, it's kind of difficult if our social standards and metrics, like for excellence, for instance, or well-being, is based on perfection, and because it is also tied to how people see you, and therefore uh, there is great motivation to maintain that facade. It's like, you know, why do people go get make sure their kids pass the UCAT? Mainly because it also reflects about something in their family, right? And you would get to see people telling everybody else
Yeah.
in the, posting on Facebook, oh, my kid passed the UCAT, congratulations, my kid is doing. It's the same process. And how do you get parents to start challenging it? Um, Sad to say, in certain situations, it could be as drastic as having a kid do something dysfunctional. there are situations that way, and even then, our society would tend to be hush hush about those. I recall there was a not too recent, probably 2018, 2019 case where there was a case of suicide, familial suicide, and that's very uncommon. Although, of course,
Yeah.
there are a lot of issues there that's been happening. It might not just be about mental health, but for that family to resort to that, it might it might have been also that there are no other avenues seen
Yeah.
because the society is closed about to discuss anything about say credit issues. What makes you not excellent in the society's eyes? If you're poor, if you're sickly,
Yeah.
if you're not good academically, if you're not a good parent, if you're not a good son or daughter. So what do you mean? Well, let's flip it over. What does it mean when you are a good person in the society? You have to bring honor to the family. And when you discuss that, maybe we can also raise that concern around maybe parents need to think about mental health not as a final judgment on the individual, which is often the case. Like when you are crazy, you're crazy for life, but more like it's a phase, it's a situation that people can surmount and they can survive and thrive. And highlighting that it's a phase, that there could be positive consequences moving forward that may not be disease driven, but more of situationally driven, might be helpful.
Anti yung sinabi niyo na parang it draws it goes back to yung parang projection ng parents sa sarili nila na kapag kunwari nalaman nila na may mental health condition yung anak ko, hindi na kami perfect family, parang it reflects poorly on them na hindi nila pinalaki ng tama yung kanilang anak. I see you nodding your head, so for our audio only listeners, yeah, there's a bit of affirmation there. How do we reframe yung perspective na to kind of tell the parents or tell the older generation na it's not about you, it's about us, or it's about me as anak mo, and problema ko to, which more or less is also probably a result of how I was brought up. How do
Oh,
we have that conversation?
okay. Well, I have 5 kids, right? So for me, it's like a whole lot of practice dealing with that kind of an issue. Well,
Mhm.
it's a good thing also I studied psychology, and it helped me manage the realities much better, despite all the challenges I have to encounter along the way. Um, One of the things that parents need to also be able to see, for me as a parent and seeing the situation, is being able to not connect their reputation to what's happening to their children, being able to respect that each of us go through things differently, that across time, what happened in the World War II is no longer relevant now today, because the politics then is different from the politics today. The realities now are different, and therefore they could actually stop pushing their their mental frame forward. But how do you do that? Maybe it's also to highlight for us in society, especially those with a lot of, with what I would term as, with those holding the mic, because the voice is power. Those holding the mic might want to start speaking about what do they want to give for the next gen, instead of honoring the family. Because if you just simply stop at honoring the family, the obligation, which is a very heavy word that we all in the culture carry, the obligation is for the next generation to deliver. But if you talk about helping the next generation build the family, the framing is about what kind of support system could help. And that reframing may need to happen sooner, with more people speaking about it. It talks about, where do you set the locus of control for your children? Because the moment, well, a lot of parents, we all came from a history where, especially in the Chinoy community, where we had to protect our kids. We had to be be hyper vigilant about safety and security during the kidnapping situation in the 90s and until the 2000
We know
pluses.
that all too well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Check out our previous episodes, guys. We talked about that. Right.
Yeah, because something happened to us also, so we deal with the trauma of that. And that when you have a trauma, the emotions connected to the trauma, that situation, will be seen in the behaviors, being hyper vigilant, being extra careful about security, sending kids abroad to study instead of working here, making sure that you're always doing monitoring the movement of your kid, not allowing the kid to walk to the school even though it's like 2 blocks away.
Right. Yes.
Those are a whole lot of things that happen in our community,
Mhm.
and that may have also created that next generation that has less experience, and that may have implications around coping with real life situations. So there are consequences, and I guess with parents, it could be helpful when we start talking about what makes a good kid. Is it a kid that follows orders, or is it a kid that, when you're no longer there, are able to function well and thrive?
Right.
And still very cultural, bring honor to the family because that's still part of the family. So it has to be that kind of a conversation moving forward, not simply stopping at the here and now, but having parents think forward when they're no longer there.
From the perspective of the larger Filipino society, no, nung pinag-uusapan yung mental health or when these conversations started happening here in the Philippines, I remember a particular quote from Joey De Leon which he said on Eat Bulaga. Sabi niya, ay, ang mental health gawa-gawa lang yan, which is very problematic. And it's I've heard from other friends, other peers na ka-age, ka-generation na their parents said something similar na parang ano ba yung anxiety na yan, gawa-gawa mo lang yan, excuse lang yan, palusot. How do we address this problem, and how do we tell our parents, our families, the elder generation na I don't want to disrespect you, but that's a very problematic thing to say.
That's a reality. Um, Actually, it's kind of tough. It it also has a lot of. We also have in our culture a lot of people would say that you need to toughen up.
Yes.
Uh, how do you toughen up somebody who's already no longer functional? Um, it's and the other thing also is because historically, when you as a person had to toughen up, and you have a veneer, uh, which is tough, but inside it's mushy. Um, the person could not see how others are. It has to do with empathy also, perhaps, or the toughening up could have meant that the person is unable to connect because that makes him also vulnerable, and being finding difficulty in being more authentic, or, being honest with what you are being bothered with. So denial na lang. Um, Actually, that's a very good question. A lot of it has to do perhaps with sciences, except for fake news. But a lot of the neuroscience. Good thing where this conversations happening today, but where science is uh, thriving, and you have neuroscience that could explain a lot of things, all the way down to personality. At the individual family level, it's very important to start that conversation where the child or the parent is allowed to talk to, say, school counselors, to be able to share a lot of things. Because what I realized, what even with my own kids, is that the child will share with the counselor, with somebody else outside, feel safer that way because of various reasons. It could be because the relationship is not working, or
It's less
they're
judgmental.
entitled. Yes, I agree, and I'm also guilty of that. Um, Honestly,
No,
because
thank you for being candid about it.
well, we'd have to start being candid because all of us are humans. I mean, just because I have a title as psychologist does not make me invincible mentally, and we have to accept that, and being able to do open up that conversation where you talk to the guidance or counselor or other adults around might help children.
Pero paano yun,
But
auntie, kapag kunwari yung anak is, kunwari kaedad na namin, right? And then, let's say we seek professional help with from a therapist. Eh, di ba there's yung doctor-patient confidentiality? Like,
oh yes.
like, kunwari, if I were to go to therapy, my parents can't go to my therapist and like ask, oh, ano pinag-usapan niyo ni Stan? Di ba? Like, that's against the law. So, how do you help as a parent?
Um, as a parent or as the therapist.
Or I mean, as the elder generation, like how do I kunwari, how does a millennial chinoy approach yung parent niya from the baby boomer generation to try to get them to understand na hindi ko lang to gawa-gawa, like, this condition, whether it's anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, or whatever else it may be, is a real tangible thing, and hindi ko lang to palusot.
Oh, actually, is it okay if I answer this real quick before Auntie? This is just based on my experience. Like, for my mom and my other relatives, they weren't familiar with the concept of mental health before until, well, me and my cousin is actually studying psychology. So we would actually often get into conversations about depression, mental health, and after you give parents a little insight or a little information about mental health, they kind of understand. And my mom, I really appreciate her. Shout out to my mom. She would always tell me that if I want to talk about something, or if she senses that there's something wrong with me, or I'm a little down, she would always tell me that, Kim, if there's something you want to talk about, it's okay. You can talk to me. I think those little things like that, it really helps. So yeah, Auntie, how about you? Do you have any other
Well, that's a very
insights?
good suggestion. Having that regular conversation, exposure to inputs and insights. Maybe at the family level, in also in my household, we discuss mental health a lot because of me probably.
Right.
and it's good that you have that, and it's good to have that sharing. Sometimes it could start off at something well, when things are not very comfortable, starting off with the discussion of a random situation elsewhere, so you're able to expound on what's happening elsewhere. Yun. That may help. I guess it also would help much more if you have more podcasts like that and other media would pick up on this. It's not just a Chinoy issue, it's also the mainstream community issue. Although people access help, what's happening is those in the know will know how to access. Those who are not in the know or are not open to support will not be open to uh, considering help elsewhere. So what do they do, or how do they deal with their issues? Sometimes it goes into addiction, drinking, yeah, and other addiction.
Like unhealthy coping mechanisms.
Yes. So bottom line, it has to be a discussion around why do people drink, why do people eat a lot, why do people do other stuff, even gambling, and a way of coping, but it's not healthy coping.
I'm glad that you mentioned these coping mechanisms kasi when we talk about mental health, it's not just yung mga mental health conditions. It also involves coping mechanisms, anger management. This is also part of this subject of mental health. So this is a question that said included in our list for our conversation. So what are the other common sources of mental health problems for Chinoys, for our community? Because yun nga, we kind of have to make this more relatable, just so like our uncles, our aunties, our parents are in a better position to really understand this conversation para makasali din sila.
One of the stressors. So if you look at an individual, there are several sources of stressors. For instance, it could be a personality issues. There has been researches that says that if the person is more cheerful, less depressed, then the well-being is better. Less issues around mental health because it is a good buffer against coping with life issues. But then in the family, if you're in the family, there are also other stressors: parents, competitive parents, parents who wants you, or maybe other demands, high expectations, realities like financial issues, uh, etc. There could be also sources of mental challenges. Okay, but you also have societal boxes, right? So when the society have certain standards and it's difficult or it's unrealistic, and the family supports that, or it's like something that's discussed as standard in the family, then you also would be having problems there. So there are different sources, but among chinoys, I think it's a mix of many things. And I've heard of a lot of issues around, say, coping with being a perfectionistic person,
Yes.
like being feeling not enough,
Yes.
which is actually not just Chinoy but global. Feeling not enough, feeling inadequate, having low esteem issues. Um, it also stemmed from what I mentioned earlier, that society expects perfection, and maybe there's a need to be more realistic about the standards that we set for people. You
I
know,
can speak from experience, personal experience, and experiences from people I know. Now, Chinoy families, na our parents tend to compare us to our peers, right? Why are you not like your cousin Justin Tan? Why
Yeah.
are you, who's a straight A valedictorian, or why are you not like your siblings who are math geniuses? And personally, it was something that I've experienced, and I don't know, maybe Stan Kim, you can relate. Now, sometimes maybe you felt like you had to perform in order to feel validation or acceptance from your parents, right?
Well, I went to an all-girls school,
Oh,
so
right, yeah,
it's super competitive there.
yeah.
And I
Shout
think
out
to
Ika.
our yeah, to our listeners or our viewers who went to an all-girls school, I feel like they can relate to this. Like I have a best friend na girl. Alam niya rin to, okay? Alam niya rin to. Both of our parents are really good friends. Well, they met way back in kinder. So way back when I was in kindergarten, we were friends ever since. Tapos this best friend of mine, she's a shout out pala Hazel. Shout out to Hazel. She's listening to the podcast by the way. She's an achiever as well. So she's really smart, honor student. And for me, I'm not an honor student, okay? I'm just average. I do a lot of sports though and extracurricular activities. So most of the time, Hazel's mom would brag about her daughter, saying that, oh, you know what, my daughter, she got this award and she has an honor this month. And then my mom would also say, pero my daughter Kim, she's part of the swim team and all of that, like subtle bragging. And most of the time, it would go on and on. And actually, until right now, whenever they would talk, it's really funny because they would just talk about our achievements all the time. Like her mom would talk about her daughter's achievements, and my mom would also talk about my achievements. So most of the time, their conversation it just revolves around that. And in some way, my best friend, she's actually open about this. She got depression. She also had a phase where she was anorexic. So there's a lot of problems talaga that she had, not just in the family, but a lot of issues within herself that she had to solve. But right now, I'm glad that she's doing okay. She's taking medications, and her mom actually was a little bit more open to the mental health stuff because I feel like most of the time, parang the issue of mental health sa kanya, it really stemmed from her mom kasi a lot of pressure
Yes.
ever since.
peer,
So yun.
the peer pressure plus the parental pressure, and then you have pressure from teachers. Well,
Yeah.
quite
Yeah.
in
That's the
general.
worst. It's the worst cocktail
Mm.
talaga. Auntie, I want to get your insight on this kasi said mentioned yung siya yung nag-start nung parang parents comparing their kids with one another, no? Yung personal experience ko, and my mom knows about this kasi
Mhm.
I joke with her about this all the time. Pero naging hugot ko growing up na kapag yung mommy ko kinausap ng ibang parents, sasabihin nila, oh, yung anak mo si Stanley, ang galing-galing pala sa ganito. And then yung, parang because in Chinese culture, we're taught not to be mayabang. We're taught to be humble, di ba? My mom would say, hindi, mas magaling yung anak mo, chu-chu-chu. And that always upset me. Kasi, sinasabi na nga, magaling ako eh, iki-kick down mo pa ako, di ba? Parang, so like in my head, I'm like, hindi, gagalingan ko pa para wala na masabi yung kabilang parents. So parang, like, I think my mom inherently knew,
Yeah.
meant well, pero she
Yeah.
probably wasn't conscious about yung naging effect nun sa psyche ko. Like, I want your insights on that kasi parang, I'm sure my mom's not the only parent na ganun, but, that's pretty destructive looking back.
It is.
Yeah, that's those are the things that doesn't seem to connect in our culture where you are supposed to be humble, but you have to ensure your social status, right? um, but you s- but you see, if you look at it from a different vantage point, that excellence that we are manifesting here, um, compared to what is philosophically discussing the culture is different. Here we are externalizing a lot of what we would term as achiever, etc. When in fact in the culture, what do we talk about when you talk about Confucian value system? Self-regulation, self-improvement, and self-growth. So if you look at it, it doesn't differ from Maslow's hierarchy of self-transcendence, that you need to always challenge yourself to improve. But the metric is internal, not external.
Interesting. I want to bounce off something that Kim said, like when she told the story of her best friend needing to take medication to manage yung kanyang mental health. That's another thing na I noticed from the older generation, medyo ayaw nilang pag-usapan din. Like how do we normalize this na yes, medication for mental health exists and some people actually need it to be functional.
Okay. Um, that's kind of difficult because personally, if there are situations where I would say, yeah, that person is already no longer functioning, couldn't sleep, insomnia, etc., then that person has to be medicated. But on the flip side, I would go slow on medication because if you look at a lot of the researches, sometimes the support from medication may be temporary, like melatonin. It might you can take it if you're not able to sleep well, but up to a certain point, it becomes a problem. It inhibits your natural system that produces melatonin. So there has to be more. It's not say, yeah, you need the medication, go. But it's more of you need the medication, go, but make sure it doesn't go beyond what is helpful also. So this is the usual strategy for psychologists like myself. Is the person functional? Is the person already unable to sleep? Like I've encountered people, insomniacs who haven't slept for like how many weeks already. Then definitely I'll send that person off to a psychiatrist so he or she gets a prescription. Definitely that should help because it's critical for the person to be able to initiate therapy, initiate better ways of going back into the what you would term as equilibrium state for well-being.
For those who do want to seek like mental therapy, but
Mhm.
are either financially unable to, or that they they're not able to yet because they don't know how to hide it from their parents.
Okay.
What can you advise these people who are trying to deal with it? Like, are there any good band-aid solutions while trying to seek for professional help?
Yeah, actually, like I mentioned, a lot of our culture actually has a lot of strategies in place if you follow it. The
Okay.
idea of balance. Part of the ethnic Chinese culture talks about being able to say meditate, self-reflect. It's a lot about the self. So when a person goes into the self and think about the self, meditate, like what hermits do, monks do, they go and isolate themselves for a while to think through their processes. Then it helps. In fact, this is something meditation, mindfulness-based strategies by John Kabat-Zinn is something that he pulled off from the Tibetan meditation practices. And he's not saying, no, this is what I discovered. He admitted he's working it. He's able to pick up that strategy because it's in place in a certain culture. And that is also our culture, East Asian culture. And that's one, meditation. basic, when the person is having an anxiety attack, like a panic attack, basic, we all have the tools. It's breathing. So breathing slowly, inhale slowly, exhale slowly, that helps. um, One of the neuroscientists who had this in a podcast would be Andrew Huberman. He has that, and he talks about several strategies for breathing. When you need the energy, you have to breathe a certain way, like, breathe faster, like when you're gasping for breath, and that actually increases the energy level in your body.
Said, I wanna ano lang, I wanna step in lang and say na yeah, tama si Auntie. These are really more strategies and techniques as opposed to like band-aid solutions. Kasi when we
Yes.
say band-aid, parang we connote na parang patchwork lang.
Yeah.
I don't think it should be that way. So I
Yeah.
think mas tama yung sinabi ni Auntie na strategies and techniques.
Yes.
On that note, Auntie, would you recommend also physically stepping away from the situation? Like, let's say you're engaged in a very stressful conversation with the person that brings you stress. Would you recommend physically stepping away from the conversation?
um, uh, yes, definitely. If there is something, it's already out of your locus of control, it's best to stay out of it, because you cannot change the situation. So a lot has to do with, it's either you change yourself or you change the situation. And if ever it's no longer in your hands, then it's better to step away if you cannot handle the situation. But if you can change yourself to be able to adapt to the situation, because there's certain value to be gained, then why not? So there's so many strategies.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
I really appreciate how you refer to them as tools, as
Yeah.
strategies, kasi I think it's a more pragmatic way of looking at mental health. Like siguro for some of us in the community who aren't as receptive to this idea, no, of let's say meditation, breathing, detaching, stepping away. These are really techniques to manage yung mga stressors natin. And I think when you really get down to it, yung mga mental health issues and problems natin are really caused by stressors. Tama po ba?
yeah, like social media stressors. And I think that's one of the big issues around millennials today. That, 24/7 ang social media. 30 years ago, when there's no social media, you have to face your bully in the playground,
Right.
right? And then after that, you can avoid that person. You can actually hide in the toilet, even. But with social media, there's no hiding. So long as you're connected to social media, and everybody is, it's that immense, the idea or the mental thought that your issues are being projected across the globe. That creates a whole lot of stressors for a
True.
child, for
Actually,
instance.
also, Auntie, speaking of social media, I like how you pointed that out. It's also a stressor to us millennials because most of the time, diba, on social media, you see what everyone else is doing or
Yeah.
where everyone else is in life. And let's say you're not in that point yet, you tend to compare yourself, and I think that's a stressor for us millennials. So most of the time, to our listeners who are listening right now or our viewers who are watching this, if you need a social media break, highly recommended, really.
But you know what's worse, Kim, is when the older generation parents start using social media and they start comparing people to you.
Oh, yeah,
Like, yeah,
actually, it happens.
it
It does
happens. It
happen.
happens. And
It
then there were
happens.
lots of times where I had to explain to people, oh, this person is like the same age as you, but yet he or she can take care of himself physically. But like, you have to understand that social media, there's Photoshop, there's Instagram, you can edit
Mm-hmm.
out your appearance. So like, there are lots of things that you have to explain to the older generation. That's why all of a sudden, with all of these unrealistic um, projections that are on social media, like good skin and that you're able to do this, and then you end up getting compared to when they have no concept of that you can engineer your image on social media, right? Yeah,
Plus on social media, people most of the time they post about their highlights in life.
yeah, they're
I mean, why
highlights.
would you post about like let's say something you didn't get or a job you didn't get? You wouldn't post that online, right? So it's all of the good things. So
Yeah,
I would say I agree with Antina, stressor siya for
yeah.
millennials.
And speaking of what Auntie said earlier, like stepping away, that's why I have a lot of friends who step away permanently. Like they just move out of the family home altogether, and That's why it's a running joke with us millennials na either you move away, you find mental peace, but at the cost of your financial savings, or if you just stay with your family, you can save up, but at the cost of your mental health.
What are your insights on that, Auntie? Yung nga, yung kakasabi lang ni said ngayon, because in a previous episode, we had a guest who's also Chinese Filipino, and she mentioned that na right before she got engaged to her non-Chinese now husband, she moved out muna para mas may agency na siya in her life. So siguro with in the context of our conversation on mental health, what can you say about this idea for kunwari people our age who are contemplating moving out para wala na sila dun sa stressful environment that their parents or their household might be forcing on them. Yes, mahihirapan sila because now they have to fend for themselves, pero they'll be able to gain that mental freedom, so to speak.
Well, actually, I have kids who have moved out, and then now they're all back here. Um, the good thing here for me, as a parent, and maybe this is something you can share with others so they can see the value of, or they can use it as a way of influencing their parents, would be that when you move out, you're actually learning to cope on your own, and there's a whole lot of life skills that you need to acquire. Staying with the parent at is a buffer. It's a protection from having to do your own food, groceries, washing, having to pay rent, having to pay a whole lot of other things, and that's the reality in life. Uh, um, if you compare us to other, well, people like our parents, or the other people in the other generations, not all of us have this kind of luxury. In fact, if you talk about migrant elders, they had to come get out of their family out of need, and this is something that is very helpful because we actually marvel at their resilience, we marvel at their capability to build a new future for their next generations, right? Maybe if you frame it that way, that, I'm not moving out because you're causing me mental health issues, but more like I'm moving out because I want to build a lot of skill sets, because the world is actually huge, and I could be moving to the US, and this is preparation for that kind of lifestyle. Then maybe they can see the value of having to agree to that change in the family relationship. Of course, there are other ways to make it a sweeter deal, making commitments to connect in a way that is helpful. Like,
Right.
we have lunch together every day, every weekend, every Sunday, or I'll call you every day just to check on you, or something like that, because that will ensure that whatever change happens is gonna be not so unappetizing, makes it more appealing because you're
Not
not
so drastic.
cutting the ties, but more like, finding a better future, and for parents to see that, I'm building my future, because it's not always the case. Well, it's not something we Chinese people want to tell our parents. It's not always the case that you'll be there with me, right? But that's a reality.
Yeah, that's a very nice insight that you just shared. Yung reframing the perspective para mas palatable to them. Yung using na, oh nga, no, our elders did have to move out from a different country to start their own life here in a different country, to start their own business and all that, and I have to acquire these life skills kasi parang siguro because of our parents or the elder generation's desire to protect us and to give us a comfortable life, they have also inadvertently spoiled us, don't you think?
Yes, definitely. I've seen a lot of people who have so much opportunities squander their opportunities, and not do well at all. There are several families that, very, very rich, but their of scions are actually not able to continue on with that, despite, the leverages that they have in life. And
Right.
that's sad. For me, it's very sad, because they could have been able to, grow, say, an organization to become a multinational, to become to have a company that lasts more than 100 years, which is very rare in the Philippines. But they're not able to, because they're not equipped. They're being babied, so to speak. And that's a good argument for when you talk to your parents about wanting to find growth outside of
Independence.
their Yeah, independence, that's one. And maybe even for mental health, being able to thrive is about learning how to not just work hard and work hard and work hard. That's a good formula for burnout. I went through that, so I understand why. But it is something that people need to be aware of. Even our culture talks about savoring, talks about art, talks about uh, meditation, which is a break from the everyday toils of life to be able to cope and excel. That's the thing that people in our culture, uh, it's quite silent about currently, but it's there, and that's sad, right? You're talking half the story of the culture, the other half that makes sure that ensures that you're able to uh, build a better set of descendants is not taught.
Yes.
Sobrang refreshing nitong usapan natin because obviously si Dr. Angela and the three of us were from different generations, but to have this open dialogue about mental health, to get a better understanding of our culture, our community, where our parents, our aunties, our uncles, maybe even sina ama and angkong are coming from. It's very important that we have these conversations, and I'll be the first to say na everything we said here isn't supposed to be like a cure all or a panacea. Like
Yep.
these are just building blocks to hopefully more conversations to hopefully get somewhere. Like nothing that we've said over the last hour is going to solve everything. Like lahat ng mga hugot natin, right? So I just want to say, Auntie Angela, thank you so much for taking the time to break this all down for us, especially for our parents, our aunties and uncles who might not be as familiar with these concepts as some of us are. If our listeners, our viewers are interested in consulting with you, Auntie Angela, or maybe counseling or getting counseling from you, how can they get in touch with you?
Wow. Okay. Normally, I don't respond to texts and calls unless I know who's calling. So that would pose a problem. Maybe it could be good if they text ahead or maybe email me instead. My email address is aayu168 at gmail.com. But take note, as a professional, we don't solicit uh, clients. Okay,
Yes.
so it has to be people coming in and people wanting that kind of a professional service that they need. And thank you also for inviting me. I think this is something that's way overdue, and I'm glad that we talked about the culture because there's a whole lot of misunderstanding around culture historically because it's like an east meets west and they didn't connect well like a jigsaw puzzle kind of thing that we need to readdress again and again.
And simula pa lang to, like like we said, sana we can have more conversations like this. We're probably going to get some questions from our listeners and viewers. Our mailbag is open, by the way,
Yep.
now steaming podcast at gmail.com. If you have more questions about mental health, wag naman sana yung mga anecdotes kasi hindi naman po kami mga trained psychologists, ano?
Mhm.
Pero yung mga questions lang to get the conversation going, maybe we can invite Dr. Angela Yu back on a future episode. I
Yes.
hope
True.
that's something you'd be open to, Auntie.
Oh yeah, definitely. I would really appreciate that, especially if it's help. I do also offer free counseling for people because for me, especially during the pandemic, it's difficult to reach out for help.
For sure.
And when the person reaches out, the help, I would want the person to be helped. In much like the same way, if I reach out, I would want somebody to be helping, right? So it's more of something we need to encourage in the culture, especially if they need it, especially when people are already, finding difficulty. And this pandemic is with the lockdown in sight again, it's going to be difficult. It's something that
Absolutely.
we have to deal with. And I'm
Absolutely.
open to do that for free, if ever.
All right. Thank you so
Oh.
much to Dr. Angela Yu, our guest for this week on Now Steaming. Really appreciate you taking the time to just have this very candid and casual conversation with us. You heard her email address if you want to get in touch with her. How about you said if people just want to chat or people want to message you or just talk to you about anything and everything involving our Chinoy lives, where can they find you?
You can just reach me on Instagram, Cedric C. Cheng, or you can just message this Now Steaming social media pages on Instagram and Facebook because I'm the one handling the inbox over there. And of course, for this episode, we've talked about mental health, but it doesn't mean that's the last of it. We're definitely going to have more episodes in the future about this topic. Like, I didn't even feel the 1 hour, right? Like, it didn't feel like we were talking for 1 hour. Like, this is such a good topic. So, yeah, what about you, Kim?
Yeah, like what said mentioned, don't be shy if you want to message us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and of course, Stan mentioned our Gmail. That's at Now Steaming Podcast. Or if you're on Twitter, you want to strike a conversation, that's at Now Steaming Pod, a little bit shorter lang.
Yeah.
And as for me, if you guys want to reach out, that's at Kimberly Mas. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and I also have my personal website. If you're shy to send me a DM, so that's www.kimberlymas.com. And of course, don't forget to follow our comics page if you need some comic relief in your life. That's at So Asian Comics. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram.
Speaking of our social media pages and our inbox, you remember our previous episode, representation in media, where I mentioned that I didn't know what Kim Chiu or Chris Chiu looked like.
Yeah.
So someone messaged me and someone messaged me their pictures. So it was very funny.
Yeah.
Bro, you deserve that.
Yeah.
So someone messaged me, like, this is what they look like. Like, okay,
Oh,
thanks.
ginusto mo yan. Ginusto mo
Yeah.
yan, man.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that,
Yeah.
Sed. All right, if you want to find me and just message and talk about everything else na pinag-usapan natin sa podcast, it is at _Stansy, that's _STANSY, on Twitter and on Instagram. If you want to check out my voiceover reel, that's also the place to go. Once again, thank you to everybody for catching this episode of Now Steaming, a Chinoy podcast. We'll see you on the other side and talk about more of these things as we try to figure out our identities as millennial Chinoys. On behalf of Dr. Angela Yu and Cedric Cheng and Kimberly Mas, my name is Stancy. We're out of here. Please keep your masks on, stay safe, stay at home unless you absolutely need to go out, and get your vaccines.
vaccinated. Yeah.
Get vaccinated. Parang awa nyo na. We're out of here. Please. Peace. Bye-bye.